Hey, everybody. I wanted to welcome you all to our very first session today called Compliance Capers. My good friend Betty Hovey and I with CHCS Consulting have been working on this arm of a podcast for quite some time. So I'm really, really happy and thrilled that we are together showcasing Compliance Capers. Welcome, my friend.
Hey y'all. Great idea. I think that we came up with here, Sonal, to showcase and to talk about compliance to everybody and ways to steer away from, falling into one of these capers that we're going to be talking about on our podcast. So I just think that this will be a lot of fun, get some good information, and let people know what to steer clear of to stay in the right path. So happy to do this with you. I think this is going to be a good thing for us.
Yeah, absolutely. We have been working in this space for quite some time. You with your own company, I just started my own. But, together we've been around the block for quite some time and, seeing a lot of the conundrums and capers that lurk, right, rather publicly on websites like the OIG website and the DOJ, right? All of these cases that we see being published are rather scary for our providers, our organizations, our practices throughout healthcare. There are specialties that are affected galore. It's not like you and I can simply say this only affects internal medicine providers or this only affects hospice care doctors and physicians, right? No, it goes across the gamut of specialties. Our cardiologists are affected, our pulmonary doctors, our sleep specialists. There are even organizations that are affected, like our DME supply types of companies, telemedicine, telemarketing. What about all of those things like COVID-19, fraud schemes, right, that have been apparent, most especially after this pandemic has lifted, right? There's a lot of these cases that we see time and time again on the OIG websites, on the DOJ websites. So I know we can share a lot about that in today's first conversation that we're having on this series called Compliance Capers. So why don't we go ahead and start talking about the medically unlikely day? I think that's kind of a big one that I know you and I have seen from time to time go as far as attorneys have gotten involved, right, in cases that you and I have worked on personally. But for today's conversation, in terms of recent things that are in the news, as recently as in December 2023,
Yep.
there are items that do involve the medically unlikely day. And in particular, there was a case that I found rather disturbing that involved a specialist, a psychologist, in fact, that was involved in a pretty hefty case that involved the medically unlikely day. So, Betty, could you tell the audience a little bit about what that means? What is a medically unlikely day?
It's funny because this is the one I tell you, this is the one that always gets me. I'm like, seriously, guys, when they first came out with the MUEs, the medically unlikely edits, well, at first they were called medically unbelievable edits, but they kind of wanted to tone down the verbiage a little bit and not sound so accusatory, I think. So they went to unlikely. But when they're looking at medically unlikely days, like the psychologist you were speaking of, um, this person that submitted claims, they billed for 60 days of of more than 24 hours of service in that day. So it's
Wow.
just not only unlikely that these are the ones where I think, no, you should, unbelievable really should be in there because, that's just unbelievable. There are not more than 24 hours in a day. You just,
Right. Seriously.
um, and so these are the ones, like I said, I don't see how these people, and I think, to be honest with you, in my opinion, is greed. That they get away with it and they don't real, and all of a sudden they start tacking things on and they're throwing codes out there. Because the mental behavioral services that this person was reporting are the 90832 to 90838. And those are by
That's right.
time. So you've
That's
got a
right.
30, a 45, and a 60-minute. Well,
Mhm.
if you're getting away with it, somebody's probably slapping codes on it. They're not adding it up, obviously, or they wouldn't have done it. So they're putting out probably the 90838 is also the one that you add on to an E&M on top of it. So they're slapping these on for 60 minutes, just one after the other. Nobody's adding it up. And because they
Right.
got away with it, they just keep adding more patients and more patients, and nobody stopped to think that, oh, well, the clinic's only open for 10 hours. So, even if you stay under 24 hours, if you're doing 15, it's still past the time that you're open, or on weekends. I think they said, that on 60 of the days they billed for more than 24 hours a day. On 900, over 900 days, you billed for more than 12 hours of service in the day. And that is a day without breaks, just day after day after day after
Yeah.
day, that they just kept doing it. It's just not
Completely,
possible. Yeah.
completely not possible, right? The medically unlikely day. So thank you for sharing those details. Um, in my mind, we're not privy to the facts of these cases that are
Right.
publicly known, right? All of the facts go much deeper than just what the OIG or the DOJ has reported on their press release, right? Those fine details are much greater. They will get into the weeds. They will get into the specifics of those 900 dates of service that you're talking about, right? Because Medicare has all of the claims data, right? All of those claims that the psychologist was billing to Medicare is in possession by CMS. They have access to all of those. So, when you get in there, when you look at the nuts and bolts of it, which you and I do on claims that we audit ourselves, right? Each claim is very particular to those CPT codes that you were alluding to, right? If those are time based, which they are, more than likely they were abused, right? Though those codes were erroneously used again and again and again. And, we don't actually know if the psychologist was, willfully just abusing the application of those codes, right, on 900 claims without taking a break, without taking lunch, without doing afternoon tea, right? Like without doing anything, just, incessantly billing claims. I agree with you. That is sheer greed, if not verging on a little bit of insanity, right? Just for the bottom line, just to, pay his mortgage or do whatever he had to do. Whatever his rationale was for sending out that type of erroneous volume of claims. So, yeah, I thought that was a great example of the medically unlikely day that we saw in December. It's just
Yeah.
shocking,
Yeah. Yeah.
shocking those numbers, shocking.
I think, it's sometimes when people see these things too, which I like that we're discussing these. Oh, and by the way, y'all, this psychologist was also sentenced to 27 months in federal prison. So on top of, paying back everything, they're going to
That's
jail.
a long time. Yeah, that's a
It
long
is.
jail time. Yeah. Wow.
But, I think that some people, when they see these kind of things, they're just like, oh my, well, we don't do that kind of stuff. So it, won't ever happen to us. And one of the reasons why I thought it was a good idea for us to do this is that, we wanted to also point out that it doesn't have to be like a in your face kind of fraudulent thing like this
Right.
scheme obviously was. It
Right.
could be that somebody in the office that's putting down the CPT codes maybe isn't reading the codes right, and they're billing for the 60-minute one when they should be billing for the 30-minute one. And so now
Right.
the times aren't adding up right. And so
Mm.
it maybe is more of an abuse situation than a fraud situation. There's no intent there, but it's still
Right.
not right. So you're still going to come up on somebody's radar for something like that. So, that's why it's very, very important that the people in the offices that are reporting the codes, whether it be the provider themselves or somebody on the staff that's doing it, or they're sending it out to a billing service, that it's being checked on to make sure
Mhm.
that these things, especially with time-based codes, it's very easy just to add the times up and see if it makes sense. So that's a good thing to get used to in your practice. If you do these kind of services, run the reports and say, okay, do these times make sense for one of our days? That's what the government and the other payors are going to be doing. So you may be falling into this and not realizing it, and then you become that magic outlier.
Mhm.
Once you become an outlier, you're on the radar.
That's a great point, Betty. Great, great point, right? Um, so often than not, it is someone on the front or the back end who is typing in those five, keystrokes for the CPT or the HCPCS code, right? And it's an, inadvertent error mistake, right? It's not intentional. But we really do have to be mindful of what those CPT and HCPCS code definitions actually mean. Because for time based codes, like in this case here, for example, it's very, very black and white, right? The definition will literally give you those time demarcations, right? Outlined in black and white, 30 minutes or 45 minutes. Like you have to make sure that you're choosing the correct code. Take the time to go back and look at what the doctor or the APP has documented in the chart for their time for that code, right? Is it matching what the CPT or HCPCS code actually is, right? So then if you have to send back a query, you've got time. You're not inadvertently making an error and pushing out a claim that is not matching what is in documentation. Because what Betty and I stress again and again is that it's not, a landscape anymore of if you're going to be audited, right? It's a question of when you are going to be audited. You will. You will be audited. So it's really, really, really important that we keep compliance front and center in our minds. And, auditing, monitoring, all of these functions are, key components to greater compliance in any practice, be it psychology or any other time based situation that you happen to practice at your offices. So, yeah, that was a really, really great point because so many of these types of issues are not intentional fraud, right? But it can appear that way, again, based on the volume of mistakes and unintentional errors that CMS may find. So, yeah, yeah,
And again, it's not just CMS, it's also the other commercial payors. And that may be,
yes,
why sometimes you
absolutely.
see, well, how did they get away with something like that for so long? The ones that are blatant, well,
Mhm.
yeah, CMS might not be the only payor they submit claims to. They may have a bunch of commercial patients they see too. So,
True.
eventually, it's going to kind of start tipping one way or the other, and it's going to get picked up on. But sometimes, unless you only see and submit claims to one place and one place only, it might take a while for them to catch on. But again, all those computer systems, they just tick, tick,
Mm-hmm.
tick when you're sending in claims to, see how many you're submitting, and you hit that where you become that outlier. I remember that I was at a physician's office one time, and he thought that was a funny phrase, and he would, because he was an outlier, and so he would went walking down the hall to his nurse, and he was like, "I'm an outlier." Like, it was big. I'm like, I'm like, Doc. It's like, this
It's
really
not a
isn't
good
something
thing.
to be proud of.
Right. It's not a good look.
You
Right. Right.
you're not like in the Wild West here. It's being an outlier, could get you more scrutinized. So this is not something that we want to be proud of necessarily. So it just brings with it a whole lot of stuff. So just check your stuff, make sure that it's going out right, and that's where the critical importance of auditing comes in. If you have a compliance program, which everybody should have, if you see Medicare patients, Medicaid patients, you need to have a compliance program. Part of it in there, it should be about your audit cycle. And these are the kind of things that, audits can catch
Mhm.
that you might not know is going on. I mean, Sonal and I, there are many times where we find where they're not billing for certain things that they should be billing for. They didn't know they could bill for this, or where they're inadvertently doing something or leaving something off or putting something in that they shouldn't. So if you do an audit of the practice, then it could pick some things up like this before you start getting notices from people saying they want records because they've caught on to it too. So you should always take a look internally before somebody else takes a look at you. So you get kind of in front of whatever the issue is that you might be having, so you can fix it. And you can document that it was fixed, and you could document the compliant manner in which you handled the situation. So that will go a long way when somebody from the outside, from one of the payors, comes to look at your stuff.
Exactly. That is spot on. I agree with everything you said. Spot on. It's incredibly unfair when these types of things get, sent to you in the mail. It's unfair. You're like, I didn't do anything. It was an error. It was a mistake. And if you're not looking right at your monthly totals of how much you're actually sending out from month to month, I guess it could be kind of a shock that you just didn't know what your volume was, right? But I think, like we stress to our providers all the time, it's important that you're aware of your metrics, right? What are you doing at the practice? You really need to have a great handle on the finances of what you're pushing out to your commercial, to all of your payers, everybody. You need to have a payer matrix. There are so many steps that we love to advise our practices to, use to, keep handy as tools to better protect yourself, right? So when you're sending out these particular psychology claims, again, for example, does that Blue Cross Blue Shield of California anthem policy, have something outlining a psychology practice, right? What types of uh, policies and manuals do they have available to your provider? Use that as a tool to see what types of CPT codes can you actually use. If you happen to be a contract provider for Anthem in California, because all of those commercial payers as well have something like an OIG, right? They're called the
Yep.
SIU. Very,
Yep.
very similar, right? They are the watchdogs on the commercial side of things, right? Special investigation units, SIU. So you're not scot-free if you happen to just be contracted with the commercials. They also look closely, and again, it'll happen later. They will pay your claims today. They'll pay them again and again and again, but it's a matter of, when you're going to be audited. They will want to look more deeply into your documentation as well, to see if that documentation matches and supports all of those claims that you built out in the past. So, all sides of the insurance industry has, checks and balances. It's just a matter of when they're actually going to catch up and have someone on their team look. So Betty and I love to look for our providers. We are provider advocates, but there are those auditors on the payer side as well, and they're going to be looking deeply based on what their job descriptions are, right? Which is to protect the payer side of finances. So they're going to be looking at things from a different lens, not the same lens that Betty and I look at your documentation against your claims with. So yeah, we definitely advise that proactive compliance, stressing on the big important factors of looking under your own hood on a monthly basis is, pretty fundamental to understanding what you're doing for your service lines, for your patients from month to month. It's a great idea to look closely from month to month to make sure things aren't going too far sideways. You can catch things quickly in the beginning before it becomes a big, blown out compliance caper that you really don't want to be a part of. Am I right? I don't think anybody
Yeah.
wants that.
Well, and that's what I think about the way they do it, the whole pay and chase mentality of the payor,
Yeah. Yeah.
kind of leads people and practices into
Mm-hmm.
these holes. If
Right.
they were going up front, on the front end and pulling these things when they were occurring, or kind of, being more proactive on their end, then, some of this stuff wouldn't get as far. Because a lot of these cases, when you look at them, like when I do the Friday fraudster thing and
Mm-hmm.
put those posts on LinkedIn, when you read through them, it's like, this has been going on for like 5 years. And it's like,
Right.
how did nobody catch, because they have that pay and chase they'll pay you today, but
Mm-hmm.
when they catch it, they're going to come back and come after you. So a lot of times, if you're making a mistake, if it's an abuse issue, it's unintentional, you could be making that mistake for a long time.
Yeah.
And while it's going on, everything looks rosy at the practice. You're getting paid,
Mm-hmm.
you're making money. Isn't this great? And then 3 years later, the payer's like, you shouldn't have been doing that this whole time. And
Right.
everybody's like, well, why didn't you tell us sooner? We would have stopped. But that's not how it works.
It's not how it
And
works.
so then now you're paying back this huge sum
Yeah.
from, the fact that now we're talking about 3 years worth of claims. And if it's something that may be a bit pricey, that's
Mm-hmm.
going to add up. And then you may have fines and penalties and all of those kind of fun things added to it. So if you get these audits and if you keep on a regular track of checking things, then you may be catching it after it's happened for a month, 2 months. If you do internal audits every 6 months, well, maybe it's gone on for six. That's a lot better than 3 years before it gets caught. So just that mitigating factor there of cutting out that whole big length of time. I never myself understand that pay and chase thing, where they're coming back. But that's how most payors run things. It's a pay and chase thing.
Exactly. It's completely unfair. When I started in the industry, I was shocked that that's how things were done, right? Because it is unfair because our providers are sending these claims out and they're being paid like every 2 to 3 weeks, right on time, And so, yeah, it's an unfair advantage. It's an unfair playing field But as I've learned in America playing sports here, like you have to just play the game. Like you have to play it. That's how it's set up, and you have to play it their way, right? So Betty and I can't stress that enough, is you have to play the game, but you need to be a little bit smarter, right? And start looking at what you're doing. Because the payers, all of them across the board, are becoming really, really scrutinous. They are looking at you very closely. And like we've said throughout today's conversation, it's for a period of time in the past, right? It's not just these past 2 weeks that they want to look at, these errors for the past 2 weeks. No, they will blow it up and look further back in terms of years. So it's so important to do those monthly checkups to benefit yourselves and your practice and your bottom line, and keep yourselves safe, and staying out of the crosshairs of these various payers. Because, once they find something gone sideways from Medicare, don't forget that you also send claims out to secondary payers. So that's another big thing. Just because you get caught by Medicare doesn't mean there's not another trickle-down effect that will happen, because your patients also carry secondary, tertiary, all of those other types of insurances as well for that patient's claim. So lots of food to think about in our conversation here today on the medically unlikely day. So, yeah, I think we gave our audience today a lot of food for thought on the medically unlikely day. Don't do it, please.
Yes.
Just practice business from when you're open. When
Yeah.
your offices are open from 9 to 5. Not longer than a 24-hour day, please. We implore you. Not a good look. Yeah.
For a couple of years in a row. Yeah, just I don't know.
Yeah. That was a shocking case, this particular psychology case on the medically unlikely day. There are many, many others out there. So please do take the time to make sure that you do bookmark the OIG webpage and the DOJ webpage, and take time to peruse them from month to month. I know I talk about them at the end of my Paint the Medical Picture podcast each and every month for the past 3 years. My good friend here posts her Friday fraudsters every single Friday. And we highlight these types of compliance capers because we want people to be aware. We want providers and practices and organizations to be aware of what not to do, right? Yes, they're flamboyant and blown out of shape, but I think we have stressed together here that these types of mistakes can be found more easily if you look under your own hood from month to month and catch things faster. So you don't become flamboyant and join this club. This is not a really good club to join.
No.
The Capers Club is not a good one.
Yeah,
No.
you don't want us talking about y'all.
No, exactly. Even though we are vague and we don't name names, but yeah, it's not a good thing to be on these publications. So, yeah.
Yeah, I need to check under your hood, every so often, make sure you're doing it, you internally just look at a couple things, run a report, what are your most frequently used CPT codes?
That's
You can do quick little checks. It doesn't always have to be a big thing, but always make sure
right.
too, you're going outside to get expert opinion, because the person inside might be the person that doesn't understand the process, and they may be the one that's doing it incorrectly. And if they're checking up their own work, of course they're going to be saying they're great. So, you know what I mean? So it sometimes it takes an outside pair of eyes to take a look at something. So yeah, it's just make sure you're looking at things before somebody else does, as we always say a lot. And don't be on here and let us talk about y'all. Yeah, you don't want that.
Exactly. Exactly, my friend Betty. Well, thank you so much for joining me today on our debut of Compliance Capers, and can't wait to see all of us and hope you can all join us next time for our Compliance Capers episode, because we really do want this to be our mission to make sure that you guys are not a part of our Compliance Capers.
Yes.
All of our tips are going to be pertinent to your practice, to maintain proactive compliance, so you avoid these types of compliance conundrums. So thank you so much for joining me here today, my friend, and I can't wait to see you next time.
I know. Thanks, y'all.